And so we settle in. You can feel your body beginning to grow heavy in the most pleasant way. In our time together tonight, there is nothing to examine, nothing to understand, and nothing to understand, only the gentle rhythm of a story. A story of a city, a magnificent, sprawling, and ever so slightly fragrant city called London, in a summer that it would never forget. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the sand before you continue your journey inward. And if you feel so inclined, you could even leave a comment, letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you now. It's a lovely thought, knowing that as you're settling into the quiet of your night, someone else might be just starting their day, all of us connected for a moment by this shared story. Alright, let the shadows in your room grow long and soft. Maybe you can hear the faint sound of your own breathing, and together, let's allow the story to begin. The first thing you notice isn't a sight, but a sound. A low, constant hum. It's the sound of 2.5 million people living, working, and breathing in one place. You're standing on a bridge, let's call it London Bridge, and the year is 1858. Below you, a forest of ship masts sways gently, their rigging like a chaotic web spun by giant spiders. This is the heart of the largest empire the world has ever known, the wealthiest city on the planet. From this vantage point, it is breathtaking, the Grand Dome Street. Paul's Cathedral seems to float above a sea of smoky rooftops, a symbol of order and faith in a city teeming with both, and with their opposites. But as you begin your walk into the city proper, the grand view shatters into a million tiny, overwhelming details. The air, thick with the smoke from countless coal fires, has a taste. It's gritty, metallic. The noise is no longer a hum, but a cacophony. The iron-rimmed wheels of 1,000 carts and carriages clatter on the cobblestones, the drivers shouting, and street vendors hawking everything from eels to oranges. The sheer press of humanity is astounding. Men in top hats and women in enormous bell-shaped crinoline skirts navigate the crowded pavements with practiced ease, while ragged children dart through the gaps, their faces smudged with a permanent layer of grime. You might not survive your first day just trying to cross the street. You step off the curb about to brave the crossing, but you pause. The street itself is a thick, treacherous soup of mud, water, and a truly astonishing amount of horse droppings. Then a small boy no older than 10 darts out from the crowd. He holds a worn-down broom, and with a few frantic sweeps, he clears a narrow path through the muck. He holds out a grimy hand, his eyes hopeful. This is a crossing sweeper, a very real and necessary profession in a city that produces thousands of tons of horse manure on its streets every single day. You give him a coin and he vanishes back into the throng as quickly as he appeared. It's in this moment, down at street level, that you notice the other defining feature of this world. The smell. It's not overpowering, not yet. It's just there. A constant, complex foundation to everything else. It's a blend of coal smoke, damp wool, unwashed bodies, frying fish, and something else. Something deeper, ethereal, and vaguely unpleasant that seems to rise from the ground itself, from the very stones of the city. You see people holding perfumed handkerchiefs to their noses as they pass a particularly pungent alleyway, a gesture as common and unconscious as tipping one's hat. This city is a paradox. It's building the world's first underground railway, a marvel of modern engineering, yet its streets are navigated with the help of child sweepers. It's the center of global finance, its banks holding the wealth of nations, yet thousands of its inhabitants live in squalor that defies description. Historians still debate the exact population of London in this specific year. The census of 1851 put it, but the city is growing at a terrifying rate. Was it 6 million by now? Maybe closer to 2.8. It's hard to count a city that grows like a living organism, swallowing villages whole and hiding thousands of uncounted souls in its labyrinthine slums. For now, the city is holding its breath. It is a giant, powerful, and deeply unhealthy creature. It knows it is sick, but it doesn't quite know why. The people here are proud, innovative, and convinced of their own superiority. They are masters of the world, but they have a secret, a very dirty secret, that flows right through the center of their magnificent capital. You turn your gaze back toward the bridge you just crossed, looking down in the wide brown river that bisects the city, the source of London's wealth, its power, and, as you're about to discover, its most profound and disgusting problem. You leave the chaotic energy of the main road and walk towards the riverbank, drawn by a morbid curiosity. The closer you get, the more that vague, unpleasant smell you notice stirred itself. It separates from the city's general aroma and becomes something distinct, something damp, heavy, and ancient. You find an opening between two towering warehouses, their brickwork stained dark by years of smoke and river spray, and step onto a small muddy embankment. The River Thames. It's not the majestic, sparkling river you might imagine from poems or paintings. Not at all. The water is a sluggish, opaque brown, the color of weak tea mixed with mud. Its surface is not clear but coated with a strange, greasy film that catches the pale sunlight in oily, rainbow sheens. You see things floating in the current, along with glittering flecks of coal dust, discarded vegetable matter from a nearby market, and scraps of who knows what. The river doesn't flow so much as it oozes, a thick soup of London's accumulated secrets. This, you realize, is the city's toilet, and its drain. For centuries, Londoners relied on cesspits, which were essentially brick-lined pits dug beneath their houses to collect waste. But with the city's population exploding, these pits were overflowing, seeping into the soil and poisoning the wells. The solution, which seemed so clever at the time, was to connect the new, fashionable water closets, the flush toilets, to the old sewer lines that were originally built just for rainwater. And where did those sewers empty? Directly into the Thames. Every flush, from every home and business, ended up right here. It's the final destination for the city's collective morning routine, a convenient, gravity-fed system for making a problem disappear. Or so they thought. It's a heartbreaking sight, especially when you remember what this river once was. This was old Father Thames, a source of salmon, a playground for royal pageants, a muse for artists. Now, it's a biological dead zone. Historians still argue about when the river truly crossed the point of no return. Was it in the 1830s, when the population first surged past 1.5 million? Or the 1840s, when the Commission of Sewers made it mandatory to connect houses to their network, like coroners discussing the precise time of death for a giant? As you stand there, watching the foul current, you see movement down by the water's edge. At first you think it's an animal, but then you see it's a person. A man, covered in filth from head to toe, is wading knee-deep in the thick, black mud of the riverbank exposed by the low tide. He carries a lantern, even though it's daytime, and pokes at the sludge with a long stick. He is a toucheur. This is his job. He and hundreds like him spend their days sifting through the sewer outflows in the river mud, searching for anything valuable that might have been lost or thrown away, coins, bits of metal, perhaps a dropped piece of jewelry. It is one of the most dangerous and despised jobs in London, a life spent literally wading through poison for pennies. He glances up at you, his face expressionless before turning back to his bleak treasure hunt. You notice something else too. The boats that navigate this river create no wake. Instead of a V-shape of clean, displaced water, the boats simply part the thick liquid, which closes in behind them with a slow, sullen gulp. A ferryman pulls his small boat, a wherry, across the river, his face a mask of grim resignation. His passengers sit stiffly, their faces pale, holding handkerchiefs to their mouths. They are not just offended by the smell. They are terrified of it, because in this time, a bad smell isn't just unpleasant. To the people of London, it is a sign of death itself, a carrier of invisible plagues. And this river, this great, open sewer, is the source of the most terrifying smell of all. It is the city's greatest fear, bubbling up from its very heart. You pull yourself away from the grim sight of the two shears and the dead river, heading back into the labyrinthine streets. That smell, the river's foul breath, seems to cling to the back of your throat. It's a smell that feels less like a scent and more like a physical presence. As you walk, you notice that the people around you seem to move with a certain low-grade, constant anxiety. They sniff the air nervously. They pull their coats a little tighter, even on a mild day. They are afraid of the very air they breathe. You are living in the age of the miasma theory. The idea is simple, intuitive, and utterly wrong. For decades, the best scientific and medical minds have been convinced that diseases like cholera, typhoid, and the plague are spread not by germs, tiny, invisible organisms they can't even imagine, but by miasma. A miasma, they believe, is a form of bad air, a poisonous vapor or mist that rises from rotting organic matter from swamps, from graveyards, from the sewage-choked river. You can't see it, but you can smell it. Stomach-turning odor is, to them, the physical manifestation of the disease itself. To breathe in the stench of decay is to breathe in the sickness. This theory governs every aspect of public health. You see it everywhere. In a small park, you watch a groundskeeper meticulously sweeping up a pile of fallen leaves, not just for tidings, but because a rotting pile of leaves is a potential source of miasma. In a butcher's shop, the owner isn't just concerned about his meat spoiling, he's terrified that the smell of it going bad could sicken the entire street. When someone in a home falls ill, the first thing the family does is seal the windows and doors, not to keep germs out, but to prevent the miasma or sickness from escaping and infecting the neighbors. It's a world of phantom menaces. The enemy is invisible, airborne, and announced by its smell. This is why people carry scented handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. The sweet smell of lavender or rosewater isn't just a pleasant reed to mask the city's stink. It's seen as a literal shield, a fragrant barrier against the poisonous vapors. The wealthy douse themselves in cologne, their homes filled with potpourri and burning incense, not just for luxury, but as a form of preventative medicine. You pass an apothecary shop, its window filled with bottles of camphor, vinegar, and other pungent substances sold as personal anti-miasma agents. Some of the city's more eccentric sanitary reformers take this to extremes. You might hear whispers of a doctor who advises his patients to smoke cigars constantly, believing the thick, disinfecting smoke will purify the air they breathe. Another odd but popular belief is that certain professions are immune. For instance, it's widely thought that butchers and tanners, who are constantly surrounded by the smells of their trade, have built up a resistance to miasma. Historians still find this particular belief fascinating, as these professions often did have lower rates of certain diseases, but the reason related to things like the acidity of tanning chemicals or specific animal-borne immunities is far more complex than the Victorians could have ever guessed. The great irony, of course, is that the miasma theory, while completely wrong in its mechanism, often led to the right conclusions. Cleaning up filth, draining swamps, and improving ventilation did reduce disease. Not because it eliminated the breeding grounds for the bacteria and insects that actually carried the illnesses. They were fixing the problem for the wrong reason. It's like someone successfully fixing a car engine by kicking the bumper, and then writing a manual on the therapeutic benefits of bumper kicking. This deeply ingrained fear of bad air is what makes the state of the Thames so terrifying to the people of London. It's not just an environmental disaster, it's a giant, bubbling cauldron of miasma, parked right in the middle of the city. Every day, it exhales its foul breath, a promise of cholera, a whisper of typhoid. Every Londoner feels it, a creeping dread that rises with the tide. They know with a certainty that feels like instinct that their river is slowly, surely trying to kill them, and they have no idea that the very symbol of their modern, civilized life is the one making it worse every single day. Your journey through London now takes you away from the river, into one of the city's newer, more fashionable squares. Here the noise is more muted, the streets are cleaner, and the houses are grand, white-fronted palaces of domesticity. The air, while still tinged with coal smoke, lacks the river's aggressive stench. This is the London of progress, of comfort, of the future. And you're about to meet the very thing that Londoners believed was their salvation from the filth and the miasma you've just witnessed. You are invited into one of these magnificent homes. Inside, it is a temple of Victorian taste, heavy velvet curtains, dark wood furniture, and walls crowded with paintings. Your host leads you proudly to a small, unassuming room. He calls it the water closet. And there, gleaming like a piece of sculpture, is the source of all this trouble, a flush toilet. To you, it might look like a simple piece of plumbing, but to the person living in 1858, it is a miracle. It's a symbol of civilization itself. Think of what it replaced: the foul-smelling cesspit in the basement or the privy in the backyard. Those were constant sources of stench, a daily, unavoidable reminder of the body's less elegant functions. They were, in the minds of the people, household miasma factories. The flush toilet, with its clean porcelain bowl and its satisfying rush of water, promised to wash all that unpleasantness away. With one pull of a chain, the problem vanished. Clean, efficient, modern. It was the ultimate victory of engineering over nature. This invention was the talk of the town. At the Great Exhibition of 1851, a spectacular World's Fair held in the magnificent Crystal Palace, the public flushing toilets installed by inventor George Jennings were one of the star attractions. It sounds absurd to us, but it was a sensation. Over 800,000 people reportedly paid 1 penny for the privilege of using them. They received a clean toilet seat, a towel, a comb, and a shoe shine. It was a novelty, an entertainment, a vision of a cleaner, more refined future. From that moment on, every Londoner who could afford one wanted one. It became the ultimate status symbol, proof that you lived in a modern, hygienic home. But this is where the betrayal begins. Everyone was so focused on the magic happening inside the house, the disappearance of the waste, that they gave very little thought to where it was going. You can almost trace the journey. The water rushes from the bowl, down a newly installed lead pipe, and into the sewer line under the street. This is where the first critical error was made. The sewers it connected to were not the sophisticated, engineered systems you might imagine. They were, for the most part, ancient brick tunnels built centuries earlier with one purpose: to drain rainwater from the streets. They were never designed to carry the semi-solid waste from hundreds of thousands of households. These old sewers, now forced into a new and disgusting line of work, became elongated cesspites. They clogged, they cracked, and they filled with a toxic brew of waste and drain water. Worse, they began to vent a foul-smelling and, in some cases, explosive gas into the streets above through the drains. But even this was just a temporary stop. The ultimate destination for this relentless, gurgling stream of filth was, of course, the river. All of these newly burdened sewers, these foul-smelling arteries beneath the city, pointed directly to the Thames. Historians still have heated discussions about this. Was it a colossal failure of imagination or criminal negligence? Did the engineers and city officials of the 1842 and 52 genuinely believe that the river's powerful tides would simply carry a bit of sewage harmlessly out to sea? Or was it a case of out of sight, out of mind, a convenient way to solve the immediate crisis of overflowing cesspites in the city's basements by simply shifting the problem onto the city's public waterway? A few lone voices who warned that turning the Thames into a sewer was a terrible idea, but they were largely ignored, dismissed as alarmists standing in the way of progress. So, as you stand in this pristine, elegant bathroom, you understand the devastating irony. Every pull of that chain, every satisfying roar of water, is an act of pollution. The very technology that made the private home cleaner and safer was making the public city exponentially more toxic. London was, with great pride and ingenuity, poisoning itself. Each flush was another nail in the river's coffin, another bucket of fuel for the catastrophe that was quietly brewing, waiting for nothing more than a few weeks of uninterrupted sunshine. You leave the grand house with its deceptive, gleaming toilet, and step back out into the London air. It is late spring, May of 1858, and the city is, for a moment, beautiful. The coal smoke seems less oppressive, thinned by a gentle breeze. The parks are a vibrant, almost shocking green, and the flower boxes on the windowsills of the wealthy are bursting with color. There's a sense of optimism in the air that has nothing to do with sanitation and everything to do with the simple promise of summer. But something is slightly off. You notice the dust. The streets, usually damp, are dry and pale. The relentless clatter of carriage wheels kicks up fine clouds of powdered horse manure and grit that hang in the air like a low fog. You see water carts making their slow way down the main thoroughfares, their drivers sprinkling barrels of water onto the cobblestones to keep the dust down. a Sisyphant task. It has rained. Not properly anyway. The spring has been unusually dry, the sky a pale, hazy blue for weeks on end. The sun feels different too. It's not the gentle, often absent sun of a typical English spring. It has a surprising intensity, a persistent warmth that feels more like the Mediterranean than the North Atlantic. People are enjoying it. You see Londoners strolling in the parks, their faces turned up to the sky, savoring the unexpected treat of prolonged sunshine. They shed their heavy wool coats, they picnic on the grass, they remark to one another how lovely the weather is. No one yet suspects that this beautiful, warm, dry spell is the first step in a catastrophic recipe. You walk back towards the river, and you can see the first subtle effects of the drought. The water level seems lower than before. The muddy, stinking banks, the domain of the two GRS, are wider, more exposed. The river's flow, already sluggish, has become even more languid. It's less of a river and more of a long, narrow pond. And without the flushing effect of heavy rain, the concentration of sewage is increasing daily. The daily contribution from London's 500,000 toilets continues, relentless and unfiltered, but the volume of fresh water to dilute it is dwindling. This lack of rain had a bizarre and unpleasant side effect that Londoners were just beginning to notice. The city's main water supply was horrificously drawn from the very same river it used as a sewer, just further upstream. Water companies would pump the river water into reservoirs, let the sediment settle for a bit, and then pipe it directly into people's homes. Without rain, the water they were drawing was becoming progressively filthier. People would turn on their taps to find a brownish, foul-smelling liquid trickling out. Some Londoners with a grim sense of humor would joke that they didn't need to add tea to their kettles. The water came pre-brewed. One of the stranger, and still debated, historical anecdotes from this time is that the sales of beer and gin actually increased during dry spells. Was it because people were avoiding the foul tap water in favor of something more palatable and, as they believed, safer? At this point, the smell of the river is still a local phenomenon. It's bad if you're near it, but a few streets away, it fades into the city's general background hum of odors. It hasn't yet become the all-consuming monster it's about to be. It's just a foul ingredient in London's already complex atmospheric stew. The politicians in the brand new, gloriously Gothic Houses of Parliament, situated right on the riverbank, are aware of the smell. They complain about it. They order the windows on the river-facing side of the building to be kept shut. They hang curtains soaked in chloride of lime, a bleaching agent, in a desperate attempt to neutralize the odor. But they see it as an inconvenience, a nasty summer annoyance, not a crisis. This is the calm before the storm. A city basking in unexpected sunshine, blissfully unaware that its greatest piece of infrastructure, the River Thames, is being slowly and methodically turned into a gigantic, miles-long fermentation tank. All the ingredients are in place. A massive volume of raw organic waste, a dwindling supply of diluting water, and now the final crucial element is being added in abundance. Heat. The sun, which everyone is enjoying so much, is gently warming this foul soup, waking up the billions upon billions of bacteria within it, preparing them for the work they are about to do. The stage is set. The fuse is lit. All that's needed is for the temperature to climb just a few degrees higher. The optimism of May begins to curdle as the month gives way to June. The sun is no longer a gentle welcome friend. It has become a tyrant. The pale blue sky has turned into a white, heat-hazed sheet, and the city, a sprawling mass of brick and stone, begins to absorb the heat, turning itself into a vast, low-level oven. Day after day, the sun beats down, relentless and oppressive. There is no rain, no breeze, no relief. You feel the city's mood shift. The pleasant strolls in the park have been replaced by a desperate search for shade. People move more slowly, their faces glistening with sweat, their clothes dark with perspiration. The air grows thick and heavy, not just with smoke, but with a humid, stagnant stillness that makes every breath feel like an effort. The constant clatter of the city seems to fade into a tired, heat-drugged drone. So too does the temperature of the water in the River Thames. This is the trigger, the moment the city has been unknowingly dreading. The warmth from the sun penetrates the surface of the greasy, brown water, and in the dark, oxygen-deprived depths, a biological process that has been happening on a small scale suddenly kicks into high gear. Anaerobic decomposition. It's a fancy term for rotting without oxygen. Billions of bacteria, which have been feasting on the endless supply of raw sewage, begin to break it down. And as they do, they release gas, methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, the building blocks of a truly epic stench. At first, you only notice it near the riverbanks. You see bubbles. Small and larger patches of the river's surface begin to fizz as if it were a giant, grotesque glass of soda. A foul, sulphurous smell, like rotten eggs mixed with decay, begins to hang in the air, a distinct and aggressive odor that easily overpowers the usual city smells. The river is now actively cooking. It's fermenting under the sun, a city-sized vat of organic waste stewing in its own foul juices. The visual horror intensifies. As the decomposition accelerates, the water becomes so de-exigmenting that the remaining solids within it begin to rise to the surface. The river starts to thicken into a hideous, semi-solid sludge. Witnesses at the time would describe it in graphic detail. They said the water was so thick it was like a black pudding, that it resembled a foul gravy, that if you dropped a piece of paper on it, the paper would float on the surface for hours, barely getting wet. You can see it for yourself. The river no longer has a discernible current. It is a creeping, viscous mass of putrescence, belching gas bubbles that pop on the surface, releasing little puffs of concentrated stench. There's a strange and little-known phenomenon that made this process even more dramatic. Some of the industrial waste being dumped into the river contained chemicals that, when mixed with the organics to unheated by the sun, created bizarre and colorful side effects. You might see patches of the river surface turn a sickly green or a strange, unnatural purple, as different chemical compounds reacted in the heat. It's one of those details that historians love to debate. Just how much of the great stink was from human waste, and how much was an unholy cocktail of industrial pollutants adding their own unique flavors to the mix. For the people living and working near the river, life becomes a living nightmare. The ferrymen, the dockworkers, the touchiers, the families living in the riverside tenements, they have no escape. The smell is no longer just a smell, it is a physical assault. It is a physical assault, and coats the back of the throat. It is said that the fumes were so strong they could turn the brass fittings on the riverboats black, and that a coin dropped into the water would dissolve in a matter of weeks. The fear of miasma, of airborne disease, turns into outright panic. People are convinced that every breath they take is poison, that the river itself is exhaling death. And they are, in a way, correct. While the smell itself wasn't the killer, the river was teeming with the very real, waterborne bacteria of cholera and typhoid. The great stink was just the alarm bell for a much deeper, more deadly crisis that had been brewing for years. And now, that alarm was screaming. You stand once again on London Bridge, looking down at the monstrous river. But now you notice something you hadn't before. The river isn't just flowing in one direction. It moves with a slow, ponderous, back-and-forth rhythm. The Thames is a tidal river. Twice a day, the gravitational pull of the moon sends a massive surge of water upstream from the North Sea, and twice a day it recedes. This tidal action was once the river's saving grace, its natural cleansing mechanism, flushing the waterway clean with each cycle. But in the summer of 1858, this very same process became London's tormentor. The problem is one of simple, horrifying mathematics. London is dumping an unprecedented volume of sewage into the river every single day. One contemporary engineer estimated it at around 400,000 tons. In a normal rain-filled year, the river's strong downstream current, fed by fresh water from upstream, would be powerful enough to carry most of this waste out to sea, aided by the outgoing tide. But this year, there is no strong downstream current. The upper Thames has been reduced to a trickle by the drought. So you watch, mesmerized and horrified, as the tide comes in. The mass of filth doesn't get pushed upstream so much as it gets compressed. The incoming seawater acts like a plunger, a great wall of water that shoves the sewage back on itself, concentrating it in the very heart of the city. right where the population is densest. The river level rises, bringing the stinking, bubbling sludge even closer to the streets and houses along its banks. The smell, which was already unbearable, intensifies to an almost unimaginable degree as the filth is churned and stirred by the tidal movement. Then, for a few hours, the tide turns, the water level begins to drop, and the river flows back towards the sea. You feel a momentary sense of hope. Maybe it will all be washed away, but the outgoing flow is weak, pathetic. It only manages to carry the sewage a few miles downstream, perhaps to the eastern edges of the city. But then, inevitably, the tide turns again. The next incoming wave from the sea picks up that very same mass of filth and shoves it right back into the center of London. This is the city's predicament. It's trapped in a disgusting loop. The waste isn't going anywhere. It is simply being sloshed back and forth, twice a day, through the center of the capital. Some Londoners, with that famously dark British humor, began to refer to the phenomenon as the oscillating cesspool. This tidal action created some truly bizarre and stomach-churning sights. Because the sewage was warmer and less dense than the incoming seawater, it would often float on top. You could literally see a line in the water where the clean, green seawater from the estuary met the thick, black-brown sludge of London's waste. This created a visible sewage front that moved up and down the river with the tides, of people being able to set their clocks by the arrival of the stench. If you lived in, say, Westminster, you knew that the peak of the stink would arrive about an hour after high tide at London Bridge, as the foulest part of the slick drifted past your neighborhood. This twice-daily return of the filth had a logical effect on the city. It meant there was no escape, no respite. Just when you thought the smell was beginning to fade on the outgoing tide, you would feel the dread of knowing it was about to return stronger than before. It was a siege, but the enemy wasn't an army, it was the city's own refuse, relentlessly returning to haunt it, delivered with perfect punctuality by the ancient and unforgiving rhythm of the moon. The very pulse of the planet, the tide, which should have been a source of life and renewal, had been turned into the engine of London's misery. The city can no longer ignore the problem. The river's crisis has escaped the confines of its banks and is now staging an all-out assault on London itself. The stench is no longer a localized issue. It has become a city-wide phenomenon, an atmospheric event. It has, as the newspapers are starting to say, gained a voice. You can feel it the moment you wake up. Before you even open your eyes, the smell is there in your room, thick and cloying. It has seeped through the window frames, under the door, through the very brickwork of the house. It's a smell that doesn't just enter your nose, it feels like it's coating your tongue, leaving a foul, metallic taste in your mouth. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your furniture. The whole city is marinating in it. As you walk through the streets, you see the effect it's having on people. The mood has soured from anxious discomfort to outright misery and anger. Conversations are shorter, tempers are frayed. The simple act of breathing has become a chore. You watch a woman faint on the street, overwhelmed by the heat and the fumes. A car doctor gets into a shouting match with a pedestrian, their faces purple with rage and lack of clean air. The city is on edge, suffocating under a blanket of its own making. The smell is not uniform, it changes, it moves. It's carried on the hot, sluggish breezes, concentrating in certain streets and squares, creating invisible pockets of almost unbearable intensity. People learn to navigate the city by its smells, avoiding certain routes, knowing that a particular alleyway traps the stench, or that a certain bridge is a place of pure olfactory horror. They begin to describe the smell with a strange, desperate poetry. They say it has the foulness of a graveyard, the soreness of a tannery, and the cloying sweetness of decay, all rolled into one. Some claim it's so thick you can see it, a faint, brownish haze that hangs over the river and the low-lying parts of the city. This is the point where the crisis goes beyond a public health issue and becomes a commercial one. The shops along the riverfront find their customers have vanished. Who wants to browse for hats or books while gagging on sewer gas? The steamboats that once ferried passengers up and down the river for pleasure cruises now travel with empty decks. They become known as silent highways, not because they are quiet, but because the stench renders everyone on board speechless. Unverified story that a group of brewers claimed the quality of their beer was suffering because the foul air was getting into the fermentation vats and spoiling the yeast. Whether it's true or not, it speaks to the all-pervading nature of the problem. The city's institutions, symbols of its power and stability, begin to falter. In the law courts at Somerset House, also on the riverbank, judges and lawyers complain they can't concentrate. Trials are postponed, not because of a lack of evidence, but because the courtroom smells so bad that the jury feels sick. Attendance at churches near the river drops, as congregations find it hard to focus on salvation while breathing in the fumes of what feels very much like hell. The great debate among historians of this period is about the smell's real physical effects. We know it wasn't transmitting diseases in the way they thought, through miasma. But was it entirely harmless? Modern science would suggest that prolonged exposure to high concentrations of hydrogen sulfide and ammonia can cause headaches, nausea, dizziness, and respiratory irritation. It's highly likely that the Great Stink was making a significant portion of London's population physically ill. Even if it wasn't giving them cholera, they weren't just imagining the headaches and the nausea, they were experiencing a direct toxic effect of the air they were breathing. So you stand there in the heart of the world's greatest city, and you realize it is being defeated by a ghost. It is being brought to its knees by something it can't see, can't fight, can't escape. The smell has become the city's personality, its defining characteristic. It is a constant, suffocating reminder of a monumental failure, a failure that stinks, quite literally to high heaven. Amidst the general misery and anonymous suffering, a figure of scientific authority decides that the crisis needs to be documented. You now find yourself in the company of Michael Faraday, one of the most brilliant and respected scientists of the age. He is a giant in the fields of electromagnetism and chemistry, a man whose discoveries have fundamentally reshaped the world. But today, his laboratory is not a room filled with wires and magnets, but a simple boat on the River Thames. It's a hot afternoon in early July. Faraday, a man in his late 60s with a kind, intelligent face, boards a river steamer for a journey from London Bridge to Hungerford Bridge, a trip that cuts right through the most foully affected part of the river. He isn't there for pleasure. He is conducting an experiment, a piece of scientific observation, that will become one of the most famous and influential letters ever published in a newspaper. You watch as he prepares his simple apparatus. He has brought with him a supply of white cards. Not just any cards, but pieces of paper that have been specially treated with lead acetate. He knows, from his chemical expertise, that this substance will react with the hydrogen sulfide gas rising from the river, turning the white paper dark brown or black. The darker the paper gets, and the faster it changes color, the higher the concentration of the foul, toxic gas in the air. As the steamer chugs its way through the thick brown water, Faraday begins his work. He drops one of his treated cards into the river. He describes the result later with a kind of horrified, scientific precision, before the card had even sunk an inch below the surface. It was rendered completely black, as if it had been dipped in ink. He is stunned. The concentration of dissolved sewer gas in the water is far higher than even he had imagined. He then tries to measure the opacity of the water itself. He tears his white calling cards into pieces and drops them into the river. He watches as they are swallowed by the brown filth, vanishing from sight instantly. He concludes that the river is an opaque pale brown fluid, but his most damning observations are reserved for the river's most obvious and offensive feature. You can almost hear him dictating the words that will soon scandalize the readers of the Times newspaper. He describes the effluents of the water, the masses of filth that are ever rising from the depths, and the bubbling of the gases that make the river look like a fermenting sewer. This boat trip is a pivotal moment. Faraday is not a politician or a radical journalist. He is a man of science, revered for his objectivity and empirical rigor. When he speaks, people listen. His journey on the Thames isn't just a personal endurance test. It's a symbolic act. He is using the tools of science to bear witness to a disaster, to quantify the horror that everyone is smelling but no one is properly measuring. There's a subtle but fascinating aspect to Faraday's letter that historians often point out. He is, of course, a firm believer in the miasma theory. He writes with genuine fear. stating that he can't imagine a fermenting sewer is a good thing to be in the midst of, and he worries about the poison being sent forth. But he doesn't just express fear, he demands action. He uses his scientific authority to shame the government, asking in his letter, if we neglect this subject, we cannot expect to do so with impunity, nor ought we to be surprised if, ere many years are over, a hot season gives us sad proof of the folly of our carelessness. His letter, published in the Times on July 7, 1858, has the effect of a bombshell. It elevates the Great Stink from a public nuisance to a national emergency. It's one thing for ordinary people to complain, but it's another for Michael Faraday, the great scientist, to declare the situation a catastrophic failure of governance and science. His words give the public a vocabulary to describe their misery and a respected voice to champion their cause. He has taken an intangible, emotional experience, the horror of the smell, and translated it into the cold, hard language of scientific evidence. The river isn't just smelly, it is measurably, demonstrably, catastrophically toxic. And now, the whole of England knows it. You leave the world of esteemed scientists and influential newspapers and travel to the river's edge, to the place where the Great Stink is not an abstract crisis to be debated, but a suffocating, inescapable reality. You are in Southwark or Lambeth or Bermondsey, one of the crowded, impoverished districts that line the southern bank of the Thames. Here, there are no grand houses with manicured gardens. There are only narrow, unpaved streets, ramshackle wooden tenements leaning against each other for support, and a constant, damp chill that seems to rise from the mudflats of the river. This is where London's poor live. Not just the working poor, the dockers, the factory hands, the costermongers, but the truly destitute. And for them, the river is not a landmark to be avoided. It is their backyard, their workplace, and, tragically, their water source. While the wealthier districts of London might get their still polluted water from private companies, many of the people here rely on communal pumps that draw directly from shallow wells that are hopelessly contaminated by the sewage-saturated soil and the seeping river. The smell here is on a different level entirely. It's not just the general stench of the fermenting Thames, but the more intimate, concentrated odors of local life. The streets are lined with open drains filled with household waste, tanneries and slaughterhouses, industries too smelly to be tolerated in the richer parts of town, operate freely here, adding their own unique, gag-inducing notes to the symphony of stink. The very ground is spongy and damp, a black, foul-smelling soil that has been absorbing the city's filth for centuries. You see a group of children playing in a narrow alley. They are not playing with toys, but with oyster shells and bits of driftwood they've collected from the riverbank. Their faces are pale, their movements listless in the oppressive heat. For them, this smell is the only reality they have ever known. But even they seem to be suffering more than usual. Some of them are coughing, their eyes red and watery. Their eyes red and watery. Their eyes red and watery, their faces etched with a weary resignation. For them, the Great Stink is just one more hardship in a life defined by them. Their diet is a testament to their grim reality. You see a woman buying fish from a street vendor. The fish was caught just a few miles downriver. It is, of course, horribly contaminated. Particularly those by the river consumed a huge number of eels, which were one of the few creatures hardy enough to survive in the polluted water. They would be caught in the river mud, sold for pennies, and boiled or fried into a dish called eels and mash. There's a heated and rather grim debate among food historians. Did these eels, living in a soup of human waste, actually taste different? Some contemporary accounts claim they had a unique muddy flavor. It's a detail that highlights the complete, closed loop of this polluted ecosystem. The people were, in a very real sense, eating their own recycled sewage. There is no escape. A wealthy family in Mayfair might complain about the smell wafting through their drawing room window. But they can close that window. They can burn expensive incense. If things get really bad, they can pack up and leave for their country estate. The family living in a single, unventilated room in Southwark has none of those options. They cannot escape the smell because they live inside it. Their homes, their food, their water, their very air is saturated with the poison of the river. This is the brutal, unspoken truth of the Great Stink. It was not an equal opportunity disaster. While it inconvenienced the rich, it was a life and death crisis for the poor. The death rates from diseases like cholera and typhoid were always exponentially higher in these riverside slums. The miasma they all feared might have been a fantasy, but the class-based reality of the mortality rates was brutally real. The poor were drinking the germs, eating the germs, eating the germs, and living in the breeding grounds of the insects that carried the germs. The Great Stink was simply the moment when the chronic, slow-motion disaster that defined their lives became so acute and so loud that the rest of the city was finally forced to hold its nose and pay attention. The contrast is jarring. You leave the cramped, suffocating reality of the riverside slums and travel west, into the grand, airy squares of Belgravia and Mayfair. Here the streets are wide, the houses are immaculate fortresses of white stucco, and the air, well, the air is still terrible. The Great Stink is a democratic force in its reach, if not its consequences. But here the reaction to it is not one of weary resignation. It is one of indignant, organized retreat. This is the beginning of the flight of the wealthy. What started as a trickle in late June has become a steady, polite stampede by the first weeks of July. You see the signs everywhere, not of panic in the way you might imagine. No screaming or running. This is an upper-class exodus, a slow-motion evacuation conducted with all the decorum that money can buy. Heavy leather trunks, gleaming with brass fittings, are carried by servants from the grand houses, and the grand houses unloaded onto private carriages. The carriages are not racing away, they are lining up in orderly queues. The horses stamping their hooves impatiently, their breath misting in the hot, foul air. Inside the houses there's a quiet, controlled chaos. Maids are carefully packing silk dresses and starched linens, while butlers oversee the securing of the family silver. The mistress of the house might be reclining on a chaise longue, a handkerchief soaked in eau de cologne pressed to her forehead, complaining of a dreadful megrim brought on by the noxious fumes. The master of the house is writing urgent-sounding letters, cancelling social engagements and arranging for the family's removal to the countryside. They speak of it as rusticating, a temporary retreat for the sake of their health. But it is a flight pure and simple. Where are they going? To their country estates in Kent or Surrey, to the fresh, clean air of the seaside in Brighton, or simply to rented villas in the outer suburbs, anywhere that is upwooden and uphill from the cursed river. The recently built railway network, that marvel of Victorian engineering, has become their escape route. The ticket offices at the grand new stations like Paddington and King's Cross are unusually busy, but the queues are for the first-class carriages. It's said that you could tell the severity of the stink on any given day by the number of private carriages waiting outside the main railway terminals. This mass departure creates a strange, artificial calm in the wealthiest parts of the city. The great squares, usually bustling with the carriages of the fashionable, grow quiet. The high-end shops on Bond Street and Regent Street see their business evaporate. Who is buying ball gowns and diamond tiaras when the air is thick with the smell of an open sewer? A peculiar and debated side effect of this exodus was the sudden availability of certain luxury goods. Some historians suggest that the price of things like fresh flowers and high-quality perfumes actually dropped in London during these weeks, as the primary consumers had simply vanished. Historians still discuss the true motivation behind this flight. Was it purely a rational fear of disease? The belief in miasma was, after all, strongest among the educated upper classes. They read the terrifying articles in the Times, they heard the warnings from their doctors, and they saw flight to the clean air of the country as a sensible medical precaution. Or was it something else? Was it also a matter of comfort, of aesthetics, of class? To endure such a smell was seen as degrading, something the lower orders might have to put up with, but not for people of quality. To stay in London during the Great Stink was to admit that you had nowhere else to go. The flight was, in part, a massive act of social signaling. Whatever the reason, the effect on the city was profound. The people with the money, the influence, and the political connections were leaving. They were abandoning the capital to its fate. This put immense pressure on those who had to stay behind, chief among them, the members of the British government, who were trapped by their duty in the very epicenter of the crisis, in their grand new, and spectacularly poorly located home on the north bank of the River Thames, where leaving the sinking or rather the stinking ship. For those who couldn't flee, the shopkeepers, the clerks, the government workers, and of course the vast majority of London's population, life becomes a series of desperate, and often ridiculous, attempts to fight an invisible enemy. With the city's elite gone, London becomes a giant, open-air laboratory for bizarre and useless anti-stench remedies. You are now witnessing a city at war with a smell. The primary weapon in this war is chloride of lime. It's a white, powdery chemical, a bleaching agent that has a sharp, acrid smell of its own, a bit like a modern swimming pool. The prevailing theory is that this powerful disinfecting odor will neutralize the foul miasma rising from the river. In a way, they are trying to fight a smell with another, stronger smell. And the city goes mad for it. The authorities order tons of the stuff. You see gangs of workmen, their faces wrapped in cloth, moving along the riverbanks of low tide onto the exposed, glistening black mud. The idea is to create a chemical crust over the filth, sealing the stench in. For a few hours it works, after a fashion. The foul, organic smell of the river is replaced by the harsh, chemical tang of chlorine. But then the tide comes in, washes it all away, and the stink returns, perhaps even angrier than before. The effort is monumental, expensive, and almost completely futile. This chemical warfare is not confined to the river. It moves into homes and businesses. You walk down a residential street and see that the curtains in the windows are not white or cream, but a pale, sickly yellow. This isn't a fashion choice. Housewives have been soaking their drapes in a solution of chloride of lime and water, hanging them in the windows in the desperate hope that they will act as a filter, a chemical barrier to purify any air that enters the room. The entire city begins to smell like a strange combination of a sewer and a laundry. The creativity of the desperate is endless. You see people burning things, not just incense, but anything with a strong smell. They burn lavender, they burn rosemary, some even burn old leather scraps or tar soaked drags on the advice of a local quack, filling their rooms with an acrid smoke that is arguably worse than the smell they are trying to combat. In offices, you see clerks with small bowls of vinegar sitting on their desks, another folk remedy believed to absorb foul odors. The sales of perfume and cologne skyrocket, but people don't just dab it on their wrists. They soak their handkerchiefs in it, stuff scented pouches into their clothes, and even put a few drops into their tea, hoping to somehow immunize themselves from the inside out. One of the more peculiar and enduring myths from this time, one that still pops up in historical discussions, is the vinegar-soaked beard defense. The story goes that men with large, bushy Victorian beards would dampen them with vinegar in the morning, creating a personal, wearable air filter that they carried around on their faces all day. While there's little hard evidence for this being a widespread practice, it perfectly captures the combination of folk wisdom and sheer desperation that characterized the period. Of course, none of it works. The stench is too powerful, too pervasive. These remedies are the equivalent of trying to stop a flood with a teacup. They are gestures of defiance, psychological comforts that give people a sense of agency in a situation where they have none. The great historical debate here is whether the authorities knew these measures were useless. Did the officials ordering the tons of lime really believe it would solve the problem? Or were they simply trying to be seen doing something? Was it a genuine public health effort or a massive act of political theater to placate a miserable and increasingly angry population? The answer is likely a bit of both. But as you stand on a street corner, watching a man frantically splash a bucket of lime water on the pavement outside his shop, the overwhelming feeling is one of pathos. It's the sight of a city armed with pre-modern ideas, fighting a modern, industrial-scale problem. They are like medieval knights trying to fight a tank with swords. And the tank, the great stink, the great stink, the great stink, the great stink, just keeps rolling on, completely indifferent to their perfumed, vinegar-soaked, lime-dusted effort. The great stink is no longer content with tormenting the common folk and driving the wealthy out of town. It is now heading for the heart of power. Your journey takes you to the north bank of the river, to a magnificent, sprawling, and brand new building. It is the Palace of Westminster, home to the Houses of Parliament. It a fairy tale castle of golden stone and soaring spires, a monument to Gothic revival architecture and a thunderous statement of British imperial confidence. It is less than a decade old, a symbol of a nation at the peak of its powers. And it has a fatal flaw. Its address. It is built, quite literally, on the edge of the nation's biggest sewer. You step inside, and the contrast is breathtaking. You leave the hot, stinking street and enter a world of cool. Dark wood, soaring vaulted ceilings, and light filtering through enormous stained glass windows. The air is thick with the scent of old paper, leather-bound books, and fuel wax. This is the sound state of power, a place of immense gravity where the laws that govern a quarter of the world's population are made. But as you walk deeper into the building, down the long, echoing corridors towards the debating chambers, you notice it. A faint, foul undercurrent in the air, an uninvited guest. The stink doesn't knock. It seeps, it slides under the grand oak doors, it finds its way through the cracks in the window frames, and it rises from the ancient drains in the cellars. The members of Parliament, the MPs, are trapped. They are, for the most part, wealthy men accustomed to the finest things in life. They are not used to this kind of primal, physical discomfort, and they are absolutely miserable. You enter the chamber of the House of Commons. The scene is one of pure, farcical chaos. Men in dark suits are slumped on the green leather benches, not in respectful repose, but in heat and stench-induced agony. They hold white handkerchiefs, often soaked in perfume, permanently clamped over their noses and mouths. They fan themselves with stacks of official papers. The normal booming sounds of parliamentary debate have been replaced by groans, coughs, and the occasional, hastily suppressed retch. They are trying to discuss colonial policy in India while simultaneously trying not to vomit. Their first line of defense is the same one used by the housewives of London: chloride of lime. The long-suffering staff of the palace are given an impossible task. They are ordered to hang vast sheets and curtains, soaked in a solution of the chemical, over every window and ventilator shaft facing the river. The entire building, this temple of democracy, now reeks of a buzzer cocktail of sewage and bleach. It does almost nothing. The stink, a veteran of chemical warfare from its battles on the mudflats, simply pushes past the flimsy, damp curtains and makes itself at home. Here you discover one of history's great architectural ironies. The new Palace of Westminster had been fitted with a cutting-edge ventilation system, designed to be the most modern in the world. It was supposed to draw in fresh air from the outside, heat or cool it as necessary, and then circulate it through the building. The problem? Its main air intakes were located at river level. The pride of British engineering, the state-of-the-art system designed to keep the nation's leaders comfortable, was now functioning as a state-of-the-art stench pump, actively sucking the foulest air from the Thames and blasting it directly into the debating chambers. Historians still debate the politics of the stink within Parliament. Was the outrage genuine and universal, or was it also used as a political weapon? The opposition party, naturally, blamed the government of the day for the crisis, using the unbearable smell as a potent metaphor for their supposed incompetence. They would make grand, theatrical speeches about the pestilential air, all while looking pointedly at the Prime Minister, Lord Derby. Was the smell really bad enough to halt the work of government? Or did some MPs exaggerate their discomfort to score political points? It's a classic historical question of where genuine crisis ascends and political opportunism begins. But by mid-July, the situation moves beyond political theater. The smell becomes so physically overpowering that the business of government actually begins to break down. Committees are unable to meet. Debates are cut short. One afternoon, the stench in the main chamber is so intense that a motion is seriously proposed to abandon Westminster altogether, and reconvene Parliament in Oxford, or perhaps Street Albans, anywhere but London. The Great Stink had achieved what the Spanish Armada and Napoleon's armies never could. It was forcing the British government to consider fleeing its own capital. The uninvited guest was no longer just in the room. It was threatening to evict the owners. You are now a fly on the wall in the House of Commons library. The windows, which offer a magnificent view of the offending river, have been sealed shut. Thick, lime-soaked curtains hang over them, but their chemical smell does little to mask the insidious fumes rising from below. The room is an oven. A group of MPs are gathered, not to research legislation, but to complain. Their conversation is a masterclass in Victorian understatement and impotent rage. I say, one mutters, fanning himself vigorously with a blue book of government statistics. A man can scarcely draw breath in this place. It is a confounded nuisance. Nuisance, another scoffs, dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. It is a plague, a veritable pestilence. My physician advises me to quit town at once, lest I succumb to a fatal miasma. This is the sound of a government holding its nose. The highest legislative body in the most powerful empire on earth is being rendered utterly dysfunctional by a bad smell. The scene is deeply, darkly comical. Imagine trying to debate the nuances of a trade bill with China when you're actively fighting the urge to gag. Imagine the Chancellor of the Exchequer trying to deliver a solemn speech, while the air around him smells like a blocked drain. The official records of Parliament from this period, known as Hansard, tell a fascinating story. Suddenly, amidst dry discussions of property law and military pensions, the River Thames becomes a recurring, obsessive topic. Member after member rises to his feet, not to discuss matters of state, but to complain about the smell. They use a fantastic array of adjectives. The river is described as pestiferous, noxious, intolerable, and a disgrace to a civilized metropolis. One MP, a man named John Brady, delivers a particularly impassioned speech. He declares that the Thames has become a Stygian pool, reeking with ineffable and unbearable horror. He is not just complaining, he is performing. He holds up a piece of paper that he claims has been turned brown simply by being exposed to the air near a committee room window. He dramatically drops it on the floor, a piece of political theatre to shame the government into action. The government, for its part, is in a bind. The Prime Minister, Lord Derby, and his Chancellor, Benjamin Disraeli, try to downplay the crisis. They propose temporary measures. They suggest moving the committee meetings to rooms on the other side of the building, away from the river. They talk of dumping even more lime into the Thames, hundreds of tons of it, a proposal that is met with groans of "we've already tried that" from the opposition benches. They are trying to apply small, sticking plaster solutions to a gaping, septic wound. There is a wonderful though apocryphal story that captures the sheer absurdity of the moment. The tale goes that Disraeli, a man known for his wit and dandy-ish style, was leaving a particularly smelly session of Parliament. As he rushed towards his waiting carriage, a journalist asked him for a comment on the crisis. Disraeli supposedly paused, leaned in conspiratorially, and whispered, "We are in a most terrible dilemma. We must either dissolve Parliament or the Thames." While the quote is likely too perfect to be true, it perfectly encapsulates the black humor of the situation. Historians still enjoy arguing about its authenticity, but its endurance speaks volumes about the public perception of the crisis. This period of parliamentary paralysis is crucial. It's the moment the problem transitions from a public health crisis to a full-blown political one. The stink has done what years of campaigning by sanitary reformers could not. It has made the state of the Thames the single most important issue in the country. It is no longer possible for the politicians to ignore it, to delegate to a committee, or to promise to look into it at some future date. The problem is literally in their nostrils, a constant, nauseating reminder of their collective failure. They are trapped in a gilded cage of their own making, stewing in a miasma of their own indifference. And they are finally realizing that the only way to get a breath of fresh air is to actually, finally, do something about it. You find yourself in a place almost as noisy and chaotic as the House of Commons, but filled with a different kind of energy. You are in the offices of a Fleet Street newspaper. The air is thick with the smell of ink, hot metal, and frantic human energy. Journalists scribble furiously at their desks, runners dash in and out with dispatches, and in the basement, the massive steam-powered printing presses rumble and shake the entire building, ready to churn out the daily narrative of the city. It is here, amidst this controlled chaos, that the event gets its name. For weeks, the papers have been writing about the impure state of the Thames, the noxious effluvia, and the pestilential condition of the river. The language has been formal, scientific, and a little bit stuffy. But the heatwave and the escalating crisis in Parliament demand something more. They need a headline. A phrase that can capture the sheer, overwhelming scale of the disaster in a way that everyone, from a dockworker to a duchess, can understand. You watch as a leading article writer for a popular city newspaper, perhaps the city press, chews on the end of his pen. He is searching for the right words. He thinks about the great exhibition of 1851, that celebrated triumph of industry and culture. He thinks about other greats. They need something that has that same epic, historical ring to it. And then, it comes to him. He dips his pen in the inkwell and writes it down, and slightly comical words, the great stink. The phrase is perfect. It's dramatic, it's descriptive, and it's a little bit rude, which gives it a popular, anti-establishment edge. It cuts through all the scientific jargon and political doublespeak. It doesn't talk about miasma or effluvia. It calls the problem what it is. A stink. A great, big, historic stink. The name appears in print, and it spreads like wildfire. It's catchy. It's memorable. Other newspapers pick it up immediately. Suddenly everyone is talking about the great stink. The phrase is on the lips of people in pubs, in coffee houses, and in drawing rooms. It becomes the subject of jokes and cartoons. The satirical magazine Punch, the great comedic voice of the era, has a field day. You see one of its famous cartoons, which depicts a skeletal figure of death rowing on the filthy Thames, with the Houses of Parliament in the background. Another cartoon shows the scientist Michael Faraday handing his card to a personified, filthy Father Thames, as if formally denouncing him. This act of naming is more important than it seems. It transforms an amorphous, ongoing misery into a singular, definable event. It gives people a banner to rally around, a common enemy to unite against. Before, it was just a terrible summer of bad smells. Now, it is the great stink, a historical moment with a capital TG and S. This is a classic example of the power of the media to shape public perception, a phenomenon that historians of communication find endlessly fascinating. Did the name simply reflect the reality, or did the act of naming it actually escalate the crisis in the public's mind? It's a chicken and egg question that's still debated. There's a quirky little detail in all of this. The Victorians had a strange love-hate relationship with slang and popular phrasing. While the term the Great Stink was universally adopted, you'd be hard-pressed to find it in the official, formal records of Parliament. The MPs in their speeches would continue to use more dignified, Latinate terms like pestilence and noxious vapours. To use such a common, vulgar term as stink in the hallowed halls of Westminster would have been seen as terribly undignified. So a strange linguistic divide appeared outside Parliament. It was the great stink inside. It was the sanitary condition of the metropolis question. But the name had done its job. It had shamed the government. To be the Parliament that presided over the great stink was a legacy no politician wanted. The jokes, the cartoons, the relentless, daily headlines created a political pressure that was becoming unbearable. The time for polite debate and useless, temporary measures was over. The name had given the monster a face, and now everyone in the country was demanding that someone finally slay it. The pressure has become immense. The combination of the suffocating stench in Parliament, the flight of the wealthy, the scathing reports in the newspapers, and the newly coined, powerfully embarrassing name, the Great Stink, has created a perfect political storm. The government of Lord Derby and Benjamin Disraeli knows it has to act. And it has to act now. There is no more time for debate or delay. This is a moment of crisis, and it calls for crisis legislation. You are back in the House of Commons. It is the middle of July, the peak of the heat wave. The stench is as bad as it has ever been. But something has changed. The mood is no longer one of weary resignation. There is a new frantic energy in the room. Disraeli, the Chancellor, rises to his feet. He is not a man who enjoys discussing drains and sewers. He is a novelist. He is a novelist, a wit, a man of high politics and grand strategy. But he knows this is a battle he cannot avoid. He announces that the government will be introducing a bill, a new law to address the crisis once and for all. What follows is one of the most astonishingly rapid and decisive acts in the history of British lawmaking. The bill, grandly titled the Metropolis Local Management Amendment Act, is introduced, debated, and passed through all its necessary stages in Parliament in a dizzyingly short amount of time. Historians who study legislative processes are still amazed by it. In normal times, a bill of this magnitude, one that would involve a colossal amount of public spending, would be debated for months, if not years. It would be picked apart by committees, amended, sent back, and argued over endlessly. This bill flew through Parliament in just 18 days. You can feel the sense of panic-driven urgency. The usual partisan bickering largely falls away. The opposition, which had been mercilessly attacking the government over its inaction, now largely supports the bill. Why? Because everyone in that room wants the same thing: to be able to open a window again. Their own physical misery has become the most powerful catalyst for political unity. An MP from a rural constituency might normally object to spending a vast sum of London-centric taxpayers' money. But right now, he will vote for anything that stops the smell that is making his life in the capital a living hell. The law itself is remarkably simple and direct. It doesn't set up a new committee to study the problem. It doesn't call for a royal commission to write a long report. It cuts straight to the chase. It orders the main administrative body for the city, the Metropolitan Board of Works, to take immediate action to prevent the sewage of London from entering the River Thames within the city limits. And crucially, it gives them the power to borrow the money to do it, an astronomical sum. £3 million. To put that in perspective, that was more than the entire annual budget for the City of London at the time. Today it would be the equivalent of billions. There's a fascinating, almost comical detail in the wording of the act that legal historians love to point out. The law doesn't actually specify how the Board of Works should solve the problem. It just tells them to do it. It is, in essence, a blank check and a desperate, legally binding scream of just fix it. We don't care how. This legislative vagueness was a stroke of political genius. It allowed the bill to be passed quickly without getting bogged down in technical arguments about the best way to build a sewer system. It passed the responsibility and the headache from the politicians to the engineers. So in the sweltering heat of late July 1858, a law born of pure desperation receives royal assent and is passed. It is a landmark piece of legislation, not just for its speed, but for what it represents, a monumental shift in the role of the state. This is the government, for the first time, taking direct, massive-scale responsibility of a major city. It is an act of unprecedented interventionism, a recognition that the problems of a modern industrial metropolis are too large for private enterprise or local parishes to solve. And it was all made possible not by years of careful planning or benevolent social reform, but by a few weeks of unbearably hot weather and a truly terrible smell. The Great Stink had finally achieved its ultimate goal. It had forced the hand of power. The law has been passed. The money has been authorized. The politicians, having done their part, can now breathe a collective sigh of relief, or at least, they could if the air were breathable. The immense, terrifying responsibility of actually solving the problem now falls on the shoulders of one organization, the Metropolitan Board of Works, and on the shoulders of its chief engineer, a man whose name is about to be written, in brick and iron, into the very foundations of the city. You are now in the offices of the Board of Works, a place far less grand than Parliament, but humming with a different kind of energy. It's an energy of slide rules, blueprints, and quiet, intense calculation. And at the center of it all, you meet Joseph Bozzoleti. He is not what you might expect. He is not a booming, charismatic leader. He is a quiet, methodical man of medium height, with a neat beard and eyes that seem to be constantly measuring and assessing the world around him. He is the son of a naval engineer, and he has engineering in his blood. He is precise, he is patient, and he is a visionary. For years, while the politicians were ignoring the problem, Joseph Bozzoleti had been thinking about it. He had been drawing, planning, and dreaming of a solution. The Great Stink didn't create his plan, it simply created the political will to finally let him build it. You watch him as he unrolls a vast map of London. It is covered in a complex web of lines and annotations. This is not just a plan for a new sewer, It is a plan for the complete replumbing of a metropolis. For years, various engineers had proposed solutions. Some suggested building a sewer down one side of the river. Others proposed a different route. Bozalettich's vision was grander, more comprehensive, and far more audacious than anything that had come before. His idea, which he now has the power and the money to realize, is based on a simple, brilliant principle: interception. He knows he cannot simply stop the 500,000 toilets from flushing. Instead, he will let the existing local sewers continue to collect the waste as they always have. And this is the genius of it, before those old sewers can vomit their contents into the Thames, he will build a new, much larger sewer running parallel to the river that will cut across them or intercept them. This new interceptor sewer will catch the filth from the old sewers and, using a very slight, carefully calculated gradient, carry it far, far to the east, miles downstream from the city. It is a plan of breathtaking scale. He isn't proposing one interceptor sewer, but a whole network of them on both sides of the river, at different levels, high level, mid-level, and low level, all working together, all powered by nothing more than the gentle, relentless pull of gravity. It is, in essence, a new, man-made river system built to hide underneath the existing city, a secret Thames designed to save the real one. There's a wonderful, quirky detail about Bozaletich that speaks to his incredible foresight. When his assistants were calculating the required diameter for these new sewer tunnels, he famously took their calculations, doubled them, and said, "Well, we're only going to do this once, and there's always the unforeseen." He insisted on building the sewers twice as big as he thought they needed to be. His reasoning was that the population was growing, and he wanted his system to last. Often debated by historians as either brilliant prudence or wild over-engineering, is the reason his system continued to function for over a century and a half, long after London's population had doubled and then tripled his own direst predictions. You can sense the quiet confidence of the man. He has been waiting for this moment. He is not intimidated by the scale of the task. He is an engineer. He sees it not as a horrifying crisis, but as a complex problem with a physical, mathematical solution. While the rest of London was panicking, he was calculating flow rates. While the politicians were giving speeches, he was studying geological surveys. He is the right man in the right place, at the right time. Joseph Bozaletich is about to go to war with the River Thames, and his weapons will be bricks, mortar, and the unshakable laws of physics. With Joseph Bozaletich at the helm, the vision is no longer just lines on a map. It's about to become a reality carved out of the London clay. You are now standing on a street corner, somewhere in the heart of the city, and the work is beginning. London is about to be turned into the largest construction site in the world. The scale of the undertaking is almost impossible to comprehend. Bozalettich's plan calls for 82 miles, or 132 kilometers of huge, new, brick-lined main sewers to intercept the city's waste. These will be connected by a staggering 1,100 miles, or 1,800 kilometers of smaller street sewers. It is a secret underground world, a vast and hidden circulatory system designed to heal the city. You watch as a section of a major London street is closed off. A huge wooden hoarding is erected, and behind it, the work begins. The first thing you notice is the sound, the rhythmic thud of pickaxes against the ground, the scrape of shovels, the shouts of the foreman, and the creak of wooden cranes lifting buckets of earth from a rapidly deepening trench. This is the cut-and-cover method, the primary technique for building the new system. A massive trench is dug along the line of the planned sewer. The brick tunnel is constructed at the bottom, and then the trench is filled in and the street is rebuilt on top. For the citizens of London, it is a period of monumental disruption. Major roads are closed for months, even years. The constant noise, dust, and chaos of the construction become the new soundtrack of the city. Carriages are rerouted, businesses are disrupted, and people have to navigate a constantly changing landscape of trenches, timber supports, and mountains of excavated earth. There's a constant debate in the newspapers of the time. While the Great Stink was a passive atmospheric horror, this construction is an active, noisy, and deeply inconvenient one. But the real drama, the true engineering marvel, is happening below ground. You are lowered down into one of the freshly dug trenches. It's like descending into another world. The trench is a canyon of raw earth, its walls shored up by a complex latticework of huge wooden beams to prevent a collapse. At the bottom, in the dim, lantern-lit gloom, men are working. They are laying the foundations for a tunnel so large you could drive a bus through it. The design of the sewers is a work of art in itself. They are not simple round pipes. Bozzalettage and his team, after much experimentation, decided on an egg shape. This was a stroke of genius. The wider top part of the egg could handle the massive flow of water after a storm, while the narrower, curved bottom concentrated the smaller, regular flow of sewage. This kept the liquid moving fast enough to prevent solids from settling and creating blockages. It was a self-cleaning design, elegant and brutally effective. One of the lesser-known, but utterly crucial, parts of the plan involved what to do when gravity wasn't enough. In the low-lying areas of the city, especially south of the river, the sewage couldn't flow downhill all the way to the outfall. It had to be lifted up. Bozzalettage's solution was to build massive, powerful pumping stations. These would be the hidden hearts of his new system. You visit the site of one, perhaps at Abbey Mills in the east of London. The building being constructed looks less like a piece of industrial infrastructure and more like a cathedral. It's an ornate, magnificent palace of brick and iron, built to house colossal steam engines that would pump millions of gallons of sewage every day. Bozzalettage believed that public works should be beautiful as well as functional, a philosophy that still sparks discussion among architects and city planners. Why make a pumping station look like a Byzantine church? It was a statement of civic pride. He was building a monument to sanitation, a temple dedicated to the clean river. The plan is magnificent, the engineering is brilliant, but there is one enormous, unavoidable obstacle: the cost. £3 million. In 1858, this is a sum of money so vast it borders on the surreal. You are now in the places where this financial battle is being fought, in the boardrooms of the city's banks, in the editorial offices of its newspapers, and in the chambers of local government. The debate is fierce and immediate. The Great Stink may have united Parliament in a moment of panicked consensus, but now that the initial crisis is fading with the summer heat, the cold, hard reality of the bill is setting in. Who exactly is going to pay for this? The government's solution embedded in the new law is both simple and controversial. The Metropolitan Board of Works is authorized to levy a special new tax on the citizens of London. It will be a rate of 3 pence in the pound on the assessed value of all property in the metropolis. For the next 40 years, every Londoner who owns or rents a property, from the grandest ducal palace in Belgravia to the smallest tenement room in Wyckoffle, will have to contribute. The cost of cleaning the city is to be borne by the city itself. You can almost hear the collective groan. You pick up a copy of the Times and see a furious letter to the editor. The writer, a self-described man of modest means, complains that the sewerage impost will be a crushing burden on his family. He argues that he keeps his own property perfectly clean, so why should he have to pay for the filth of his neighbors? It is a classic argument against public spending, one that has been repeated in countless debates over the centuries. The opposition is not just from individuals. It's organized. You attend a meeting of a local parish council. A red-faced vestryman is on his feet, banging his fist on the table. He represents one of the wealthier, newer parishes on the outskirts of London. He argues that his parish has already invested in its own, perfectly adequate local sewers. Why should his constituents now be taxed to solve the problems of the ancient, filthy, and badly managed parishes in the center of the city? It is an argument about fairness, about local autonomy versus centralized control. The debate also has a geographical and social dimension. Some of the most vocal opponents are the large industrial businesses, especially those located on the river. The owners of tanneries, chemical works, and slaughterhouses, who have been using the Thames as a free, private sewer for decades, are now outraged that they will be taxed to stop doing the very thing that made their businesses profitable. Historians still find a dark irony in this. The biggest polluters were often the loudest complainers about the cost of the cleanup. And then there is the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the borrowing. The Board of Works doesn't have £3 million sitting in a bank account. They have to borrow it, issuing bonds that will be paid back, with interest, over 40 years. This is a huge financial gamble. Will the city be able to sustain this level of debt? What if there's a war or a financial crash? Cartoonists have a field day. Drawing Joseph Bozoletich as a comical figure throwing mountains of golden sovereigns into a giant hole in the ground marked drains. There's even a quirky, legalistic argument that gets some traction. A few clever lawyers point out that the River Thames is technically a national waterway, a public highway. The cost of cleaning it should be borne by the national treasury, not just the citizens of London. Why should a Londoner pay to clean a river that a merchant from Liverpool or a sailor from Glasgow also uses? This argument, though logical, or a sailor from Glasgow also uses, is quickly dismissed by a government that has no intention of footing the bill. The debate over who pays for national infrastructure versus local infrastructure is one that continues to this very day, and its roots are clearly visible here. But in the end, the arguments fail. The memory of the great stink is too fresh to raw. The law has been passed and the Board of Works has the power. The tax is levied, and so with grumbling and complaining, the money begins to flow. The citizens of London, whether they like it or not, begin to pay for their own salvation 1 penny at a time. The money is secured. The plans are finalized. Now the project needs an army. You cannot build a secret river beneath London with a handful of men. You need a workforce of unprecedented scale, toughness, and skill. You are about to meet the men who will physically build Bozolettich's vision, the unsung heroes of this underground epic, the Navvies. The term Navvy is a shortened version of navigator, a name given to the men who dug the canals, the inland navigations of the 18th century. By the mid-19th century, they are the elite heavy infantry of the Industrial Revolution. They are the men who built the railways, the bridges, and the tunnels that transformed the face of Britain. They are a tribal part, a nomadic workforce of immense physical strength and legendary endurance. You see them arriving in London, drawn by the promise of steady work and good wages. They are instantly recognizable. They are large men, powerfully built from years of manual labor. Their uniform is distinctive, heavy, hobnailed boots, thick corduroy trousers tied below the knee with a piece of string, a Y-arc, a collarless flannel shirt, and a waistcoat. They are famously proud and fiercely independent. They do not see themselves as mere laborers. They are skilled craftsmen, masters of the earth. You watch them work in one of the deep trenches. The ground is a thick, heavy, unforgiving layer of London clay. A team of Navvies attacks it with a rhythmic, disciplined violence. The man at the front is the ganger, the leader of the team. He sets the pace. He swings his percost, loosening a chunk of clay. The men behind him with shovels immediately move in, scooping up the loosened earth and hurling it onto a wooden platform above. From there, another team loads it into carts to be hauled away. The work is relentless, repetitive, and punishingly hard. It is said that the average Navvy shifted 20 tons of earth in a single 10-hour shift. That is the equivalent of digging a trench the length of a swimming pool, 5 feet wide and 5 feet deep, every single day, by hand. Their diet is the fuel for this incredible output. The Navvy's appetite is legendary. They consume a staggering number of calories, primarily in the form of beef and beer. You see them at their midday meal, sitting on piles of timber, devouring thick slabs of bread and huge portions of steak, washed down with ale. It is a high-protein, high-energy diet that would floor a normal person, but for them, it is a basic necessity. There's a fascinating and ongoing historical debate about the exact caloric intake of the average Navvy. Estimates range from 5,000 to 7,000 calories a day, a level of consumption usually associated with professional athletes in the modern era. Life for the Navvies is hard and dangerous. The work sites are a landscape of peril. The trenches, sometimes 40 feet deep, are a constant threat. The timber shoring could give way, burying men alive in an instant. There are accidents with the primitive machinery, with underground water sources, and most terrifyingly with pockets of flammable methane gas that could be ignited by a stray spark from a percosk, causing a catastrophic explosion. The casualty rate on the project is high. Though poorly documented, These men are, in a very real sense, soldiers in a war against the city's geology, and many of them become casualties of that war. They live as hard as they work. They are often housed in temporary camps or crowded lodging houses near the work sites. After their brutal shift, they descend on the local pubs, drinking heavily, fighting, and earning a reputation for being wild and lawless. They are a community that exists on the margins of Victorian society, respected for their skill and strength, but also feared for their rough, hard-living ways. As you stand there, watching these men toil in the mud and the gloom, you realize you are witnessing an act of creation as profound as the building of a cathedral. They are not just digging a ditch, they are reshaping the city on a subterranean level. Their sweat, their strength, and in some cases their lives are the price of London's clean river. Joseph Buzzelettage may be the brain of this great project, but the Navvis are its muscle, its heart, and its backbone. The raw earth canyon you saw before is no longer just a scar in the ground. It is being transformed. The Navvis, masters of demolition and excavation, have done their work. Now, a different kind of army descends into the trenches. These are the bricklayers, and they are not here to dig, but to build. They are the artists who will give Buzzelettage's hidden world its form and substance. You are lowered by a simple winch into a newly completed section of a main interceptor sewer. The moment your feet touch the curved floor, the noisy, chaotic world of the London street above simply vanishes. The silence is sudden and profound, broken only by the faint drip of water and the soft echo of your own breathing. The air is cool and smells clean, a damp, earthy scent of wet clay and fresh mortar. It is, for now, the cleanest air in London. You hold up a lantern, and its flickering light reveals a scene of staggering, unexpected beauty. You are standing in a tunnel, but that word feels utterly inadequate. This is a vast, subterranean hall, a perfectly executed arch of brick that soars above your head. The walls curve with a grace and precision that seems impossible, a perfect, smooth, egg-shaped tube stretching into the darkness as far as your light can reach. This is not infrastructure. This is architecture. You're standing in what is arguably the most beautiful, and certainly the most expensive, sewer in the history of the world. This is what people mean when they call them cathedrals of brick. The scale is monumental, the craftsmanship exquisite. You run your hand over the wall. The bricks are cool and smooth to the touch, laid with the mathematical perfections. There are no gaps, no imperfections, no soppy mortar joints. Each brick fits against its neighbor with the precision of a watchmaker. The Victorians had perfected the art of brick making, producing hard, dense, engineering bricks that, when struck, would ring with an almost metallic clarity. They were incredibly strong and, crucially, non-porous, making them the perfect material for this colossal damp undertaking. You walk deeper into the tunnel, your footsteps echoing in the cathedral-like space. You begin to notice the subtle details of the brickwork, the intricate patterns of the bonds. This is where you see the work of individual artisans. The bricklayers were paid by the piece, for the amount of wall they could build in a day. They worked in small teams, and each team, and sometimes each individual bricklayer, had their own style, their own subtle signature in the way they finished their mortar joints or laid a particularly difficult curve. It's a fascinating, hidden detail that adds a human touch to this inhumanly vast structure. Historians and engineers who have studied the sewers can sometimes identify the work of different teams as they move through the tunnels, recognizing these long-lost, anonymous signatures. This incredible quality and attention to detail has sparked a long-running historical debate. Why was so much care and expense lavished on something that almost no one would ever see? One school of thought is purely functional. Buzzelettage and his engineers knew that the smooth, uninterrupted flow of sewage was critical. Any rough patch, any protruding brick or sloppy joint, could snag solid waste, creating a small dam that could eventually lead to a catastrophic blockade. The beautiful curves and perfect surfaces were, in this view, a hydraulic necessity, a triumph of function dictating form. But another, equally compelling argument is that it was a matter of pure Victorian pride. This was the greatest city in the world, and its public works had to reflect that. Joseph Buzzelettage was not just building a drain, He was building a monument to the engineering prowess and civic confidence of his age. The idea of doing it cheaply or shoddily would have been an anathema to him. He was building this system to last for centuries, and he was going to build it properly, even the parts that were destined for a life of darkness and filth. The sheer numbers are difficult to process. Over the course of the project, a mind-boggling 318 million bricks would be used. They were all laid by hand, one by one, by thousands of skilled, anonymous craftsmen working by candlelight deep beneath the ground. As you stand there, in the silent, waiting darkness of this magnificent tunnel, you realize that this is their monument. It is a testament to an era that believed in building things to last, a hidden masterpiece of public art, waiting patiently for the foul tide it was built to tame. The bricks are beautiful, the design is ingenious, but this entire subterranean cathedral rests on one crucial, and at the time, revolutionary material. You are now at a wharf on the Thames, but instead of the usual chaos of cotton bales and tea chests, this place is piled high with heavy barrels. You watch as a navvy pries the lid off one. This is the glue that will hold Bozoletich's vision together. This is Portland cement. To you, cement is a mundane, everyday substance. But in the 1860 seconds, it is still a relatively new and exciting technology. For centuries, builders had relied on traditional lime mortar, the stuff you see in old castles and cathedrals. Lime mortar is effective, but it has a fatal flaw. It takes a very long time to harden, and it is vulnerable to being washed away by water before it can properly set or cure. You cannot build a gigantic, permanently damped sewer system with a mortar that dissolves in water. It would be like trying to build a ship out of sugar. Portland cement was different. It was a type of hydraulic lime, meaning it could set and harden even when fully submerged in water. More than that, it was incredibly strong and fast setting. It was invented in the 1820 seconds by an English bricklayer named Joseph Aspdn, who named it Portland cement because the hard, grey stone it produced when set resembled the prestigious Portland stone, a famous building material quarried on the Isle of Portland. For decades, it was a niche, expensive product, its manufacturing process a closely guarded secret. Bozoletich and his team knew that this new material was the only thing that could work. They needed a mortar that could withstand the constant dampness of the London clay, the immense pressure of the earth above, and the corrosive nature of the sewage itself. They decided to make Portland cement the foundation of the entire project, not just for the mortar between the bricks, but for the huge concrete foundations that the tunnels would sit on. This decision turned the London sewer project into the single biggest consumer of Portland cement in the world. It turbocharged the industry, transforming it from a small-scale, specialist trade into a massive industrial enterprise. You can imagine the cement manufacturers, small family firms who had been pottering along for years, suddenly receiving orders of a magnitude they had never dreamed of. New factories sprung up along the Thames estuary to meet the demand, their kilns belching smoke as they cooked the precise recipe of limestone and clay required to create the magic powder. But Bozoletich, being the meticulous man he was, did not simply trust the manufacturers. He was a pioneer of quality control. He set up a dedicated testing laboratory at his headquarters. You can picture the scene, a room filled with serious-looking men in lab coats, taking samples from every single batch of cement that arrived on site. They would mix small blocks of concrete and subject them to a battery of tests. They had machines to pull them apart, all to measure their strength with scientific precision. If a batch of cement was not up to Bozoletich's incredibly high standards, the entire shipment was rejected and sent back. This rigorous testing had a profound effect. It forced the cement manufacturers to standardize their product and improve their quality. The specifications that Bozoletich wrote for the cement used on the sewer project became the industry standard for decades to come. This is a fascinating, and often overlooked, legacy of the Great Stink. The quest to clean a river accidentally revolutionized the global construction industry. Historians of technology still study this as a classic case of how a large-scale public works project can drive innovation in materials science. So as you watch that novi expertly trowel while the grey mortar onto a brick, you understand that you are seeing a quiet revolution. The strength of this new, artificial rock is what makes the whole endeavor possible. The bricks may be the bones of the system, but the Portland cement is its powerful, unyielding sinew, locking everything together in a solid, monolithic mass, strong enough to defy the weight of the city in the passage of time. The years have passed. The noise, the disruption, the colossal effort of thousands of men toiling beneath the city streets is finally about to pay off. It is the spring of 1865. 7 years have passed since the Great Stink. The major interceptor sewers on the northern side of the river are complete. The magnificent pumping stations are ready, their giant steam engines polished and waiting. The moment of truth has arrived. You are standing on a street corner, near the river, somewhere in the heart of old London. For as long as anyone can remember, the drain at your feet has been an exit, a foul-smelling well that, after a heavy rain, would spew a vile mixture of storm water and sewage directly onto the street or into the nearby Thames. It is one of thousands of such outlets, the final, messy endpoints of London's ancient, overloaded sewer system. But today, something is different. You are part of a small crowd of engineers, city officials, and curious onlookers. Joseph Bazzalettage is here, his face as calm and unreadable as ever, though you can sense a quiet tension in his posture. He gives a signal. A few hundred yards away, a team of navvies turns a giant cast-iron wheel. With a low, groaning sound, a heavy metal gate, known as a penstock, is slowly lowered. This gate blocks the old sewer's path to the river. At the same time, another gate is opened, one that connects this old sewer for the first time to the vast, new interceptor tunnel that has been built deep beneath it. For a moment, nothing happens. Then you hear it, a new sound coming from deep underground. It is a low, powerful gurgle, the sound of a vast quantity of liquid suddenly finding a new path. The sewage and wastewater from this entire district, which for centuries has flowed inevitably towards the Thames, is now being diverted. It has been intercepted. It is now on a one-way, 10-mile journey eastwards, traveling silently, and Bazzalettage's new subterranean river, all the way out of the city. This scene is repeated, street by street, district by district, all across the north of London. It is a slow, methodical, and almost entirely invisible revolution. There is no grand ceremony for the public, no ribbon to be cut. The great diversion happens in darkness, underground, marked only by the turning of iron wheels and the sound of gushing water finding its new, man-made channel. This gradual, phased opening of the system is a subject of some historical debate. Why wasn't there a single, grand opening day? Some historians argue it was a matter of pure engineering caution. Bazzalettage wanted to bring the system online slowly, to test each section for leaks and failures before putting the entire network under full load. Others suggest it was a political decision. A gradual, quiet start avoided drawing too much attention, preventing any potential public outcry if there were early teething problems. It was a typically understated, unpractical approach, very much in keeping with Bazzalettage's own personality. For the people of London, the effect is not immediately obvious. The river doesn't magically turn blue overnight. But slowly, subtly, the change begins. The most immediate difference is noticed after a heavy rainfall. The streets in the low-lying areas, which used to flood with a foul-smelling sewage-laced water, now remain surprisingly clear. The new sewers are doing their job, carrying away the storm water with an efficiency London has never known. There's a quirky and rather charming anecdote from this period. It's said that some of the old ferrymen on the Thames, men who had spent their lives navigating the foul, greasy water, were among the first to notice the change. They claimed that their oars, for the first time in their living memory, no longer came up from the water coated in a thick black slime. They could actually see the wood of their oars again. It was a small, simple observation, but it was a sign of a profound transformation. The great diversion was working. The lifeblood of the city was no longer its poison. The healing had begun. The years continued to roll by. The construction on the southern side of the river is completed. The last of the old, polluting sewer outfalls is finally sealed off. By 1875, 17 years after the Great Stink, Bazzalettage's grand design is fully operational. Now, you can witness the long-term consequences of this monumental undertaking. You can watch a river being brought back from the dead. You stand once again on London Bridge, the same spot where the story began. The view is on the surface largely the same. The dome of street poles still dominates the skyline, the forests of masts still crowd the docks, but when you look down at the water, the difference is profound. It is no longer the opaque, black-brown sludge you first saw. The water is still murky, still the color of a muddy estuary, but it has a life to it now. It has a current, it flows. You can see the wake of the boats are clean, churning white against the darker water. The greasy, rainbow film is gone. And the smell, that is the most astonishing change. It's gone. The air no longer has that heavy, foul, organic undertone. It still smells of a 19th century industrial city, of coal smoke and horsemen on dark brick. But the aggressive, all-pervading stench of the river, the stench that defined the summer of 1858, has vanished. The ecological recovery of the river is a slow, almost miraculous process. For years the Thames had been considered biologically dead, a body of water so de-exigmenting, unpolluted that nothing could survive in it. But now, with the constant deluge of raw sewage cut off, nature begins its patient work of healing. The first sign of life's return is subtle. You see small, hardy species of aquatic plants starting to grow again along the newly built embankments. Then, the insects and the microorganisms that feed on them begin to reappear. The return of the fish is a moment of public celebration. For decades, the only fish found in the central Thames were eels, and even they were struggling. But now, fishermen start reporting catches of species that haven't been seen in a generation. They catch flounder, dace, and roach. The news causes a sensation. In 1881, a fisherman catches a single smelt, a delicate, silvery fish known to be incredibly sensitive to pollution. The lone fish is hailed in the newspapers as a symbol of the river's rebirth. The ultimate triumph comes a few years later, when rumors begin to circulate of a truly unbelievable sighting, a salmon, the king of fish, seen leaping in the water near the Houses of Parliament. Historians still debate the exact timeline of this recovery. Was the river's revival as quick and dramatic as the triumphant Victorian press claimed? Or was it a more gradual, complex process with setbacks along the way? The consensus is that while the improvement was real and dramatic, the Thames was still far from a pristine wilderness. It was still the receiving end of industrial pollution from factories and runoff from the city streets. But the single greatest source of its sickness, the raw sewage of 3 million people, had been eliminated. The patient was off life support and was beginning to heal itself. There's a wonderful, quirky detail related to the river's newfound cleanliness. The British House of Commons had, for centuries, a tradition where a senior government official held the title of Steward and Bailiff of the Chiltern Hundreds. It was a legal fiction, an office of profit under the Crown that an MP could be appointed to in order to legally resign their seat. After the sewer system was built, a joke started circulating that they should create a new, similar office, Chief Fisherman of the River Thames. The joke was that, for the first time in living memory, it was an office that might actually involve some fishing. The river, once a source of terror and disgust, a symbol of the city's failure, is slowly becoming a source of pride again. People start to use it for recreation. Rowing clubs, which had long since fled to cleaner waters upstream, begin to return. Pleasure steamers, once the carriers of gagging passengers, are now filled with happy Londoners enjoying a day out on their newly cleansed river. Old Father Thames, the ancient heart of the city, has been given a second chance. The river is cleaner, the air is fresher, but the most profound legacy of the great stink is one you cannot see or smell. It is an invisible miracle that takes place not in the river, but in the bodies of the people of London. For decades, the city had been stalked by a terrifying, unmerciless killer cholera. It would arrive suddenly, kill with horrifying speed, and then vanish, leaving thousands dead in its wake. The great outbreak of 1854, just 4 years before the stink, had claimed over 10,000 lives, and everyone, from the most esteemed physician to the poorest slum dweller, was convinced they knew the cause. It was the miasma, the foul air. The stench itself was the plague. So, in their minds, the Great Sewer Project was a war against the smell, a way to purify the air and prevent the dreaded cholera asthma from rising out of the river and the ground. They were completely, utterly wrong about the cause, but miraculously, they stumbled upon the right cure. The real killer wasn't in the air. It was in the water. Cholera is a waterborne disease, spread by a bacterium that thrives in water contaminated with sewage. The city's main source of drinking water was the Thames and the shallow wells dug into the sewage-saturated ground. Londoners were, quite literally, drinking the disease. Brilliant doctor named John Snow had figured this out during the 1854 outbreak, famously tracing it to a single contaminated water pump on Broad Street, but his germ theory was dismissed by the medical establishment as eccentric and unproven. And so we have one of the greatest ironies in the history of public health. By building a massive system to stop a smell they wrongly believed was carrying a disease, they accidentally, and almost incidentally, removed the actual carrier of the disease from the city's drinking water supply. When the next great cholera, a pandemic, swept across Europe in 1866, doctors in London held their breath, waiting for the inevitable wave of death. It never came. London remained almost completely unscathed. The disease simply couldn't get a foothold. Bosseletage's sewers had, without ever intending to, saved tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. Historians have long debated this point. Was it purely a lucky accident, or did Bosseletage and the sanitary reformers, despite their public adherence to miasma theory, have a growing, intuitive understanding of the link between foul water and illness? It's a compelling question with no clear answer. But the results were undeniable. There is another, far more visible legacy. You are walking along the river now, on a wide, grand promenade. A stone wall separates you from the water, elegant iron benches invite you to rest, and mature plane trees offer a pleasant shade. This is the Victoria Embankment, and the solid ground beneath your feet simply did not exist before the sewers were built. Bosseletage, in another stroke of engineering genius, used the project to reshape the very map of London. He built the main Northern Interceptor sewer right along the river's edge, and then used the millions of tons of excavated earth from the project to fill in the land behind it, reclaiming huge swaths of the foul-smelling tidal mudflats. This created miles of new, valuable real estate, new roads that eased the city's terrible traffic congestion, and beautiful public parks and gardens. It also allowed for the construction of the District Line of the London Underground, which was built using the same cut-and-cover method right alongside the new sewer before the whole thing was covered over. The sewer, the railway, and the embankment are all layered together, the hidden sandwich of Victorian infrastructure. It was an act of city building on a heroic scale, a beautiful side effect of a sanitation project, and it was all paid for by the sale of the new and they had created out of thin air and mud. The Great Stink, in the end, didn't just give London a new sewer system, it gave it the iconic, beautiful riverside it has today. And so the London of our story begins to fade. The clatter of the carriages, the shouts of the navvies, the faint, lingering memory of that terrible smell, all of it can soften now, dissolving into a gentle, quiet haze. The great work is done. The hidden river flows silently, unceaselessly beneath the sleeping city, doing its vital work, unseen, undone, thanked. Just as the great sewers carried away the troubles of the day, you can feel any lingering thoughts of your own day beginning to drift away now, carried on a slow and gentle current, moving further into the distance, leaving behind only a sense of calm and quiet accomplishment. The story is complete, the city is at peace, and you can be too. Our journey together tonight ends here in this quiet place. Should you need another tale to accompany you further into rest, my library of stories is always open for you. May your dreams be kind. Good night.